We are growing up Italian. Yes. Benvenuti, benvenuti a tutti. Welcome. This is Growing Up Italian featuring Marianne Leone or Leoni, depends on how you pronounce it, and Chris Castellani. I am Chiara Durazzini. Buonasera. Hello again. I've been seeing you all for, the past numerous events. And I am the event coordinator at I Am Books, the Italian and Italian American bookstore here in Boston, in the heart of the North End. We just reopened, so please come and visit. And also, make sure to check our website and the event page because we have a lot of events coming up, both online and in person. Yay! So this event is part of the series Our Voyage, Italian American Stories, organized by our bookstore in partnership with NIAF or NIAF. There's always National Italian American Foundation. So thank you, NIAF. Grazie, NIAF. So welcome everybody. To break the ice tonight, because I would like for this event to be very relaxed, to be a chat with, of course, my guests, but also with you, audience, about your or our growing up Italian in an Italian family. Now, for me, I'm a fresh immigrant because I came to Boston about 20 years ago. I'm originally from Florence. So, and you can hear my accent, I think. So, I am a new immigrant. And of course, my children will be what I think Marianne was to her mother, who is, Marianne is first generation. So here we have a sort of a mix of different generations and different Italian background. I notice, and this is my observation, that when you are an Italian coming today, you're not as an Italian coming back in the day, like perhaps Marianne's mother or probably Chris's family. Dynamics have changed a lot. But before we start our conversation, I want to read their bios so you know who they are and how marvelous they are and their fabulous career. So, benvenuta Marianna. Marianne Leone is the author of Jessie, a very beautiful, moving book about her son, and Ma Speaks Up. Essays in the Boston Globe, she wrote, of course, Leith Hub, Solstice, Coastal Living, Bark, Post Road, and others. She had a recurring role on HBO's The Sopranos. How to forget it, right? As Joanne Moltisanti, Christopher's mother, and acted in films by John Sayles, Larry David, Martin Scorsese, Nancy Savoca, and David Russell. Chris Castellani is the author of 5 books, most recently the novel Leading Men, for which he received fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and MacDowell. The screen adaptation of Leading Men, I'm so excited, is currently being written by Matthew Lopez, The Inheritance, and produced by Luca Guadagnino and Peter Spears, Call Me By Your Name. Beautiful movie. Christopher is on the fiction faculty of the Warren Wilson MFA program and the Brad Loaf Writers Conference. His collection of essays on the craft of fiction, The Art of Perspective, is taught in many writing workshops. He lives in Provincetown and Boston, where he is artistic director of Grub Street. Benvenuti, benvenuti, benvenuti. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now, just also to break the ice among our attendees, I would like for our attendees, if they want to write if they are Italian American or if they are Italian, where they are coming from, where their family is from, or they themselves are from. So feel free to write in the chat, and so we can kind of see each other who is attending. Oh, Benevento, you see, Barbara is saying Benevento. Very good. Families from Napoli. Bravi. Very good. Write it down. We want to see. Okay, enough with my talking. Marianne, let's open the floor to you.
Okay, well, I am first generation, as you said, and both my father was born in San Donato Val di Comino, a little tiny mountain town in Lazio province, vicina di Frosinone, near Frosinone. And my sister and I visited there in 2007. And even getting there was really hard because it was such a little dot on the horizon, but it's a beautiful village. My mother is from Sulmona in Abruzzo, in the province of L'Aquila. And she lived 5 kilometers outside of the town, which has aqueducts and has a famous procession and cathedrals and is gorgeous. My mother grew up on this garlic farm and came here at the age of 16 to escape fascism and an arranged marriage to an old man who had land. So that was the official story, which I shall read to you later, is the beginning of Ma Speaks Up. Because, you know, being the daughter of somebody who wasn't born in this country and who seemed so much like the other. I grew up, you know, in the late 50s and 60s, and Italians were like represented as like fat, obsequious waiters, or they were jokes, basically. Peppino the Italian mouse. And my mother was othered, and I just was desperate to be American. And so that's what I remember growing up. I don't know if it was like that for you, Chris, because your mother was a later immigrant than my mother.
Right. Well, both my parents came over from Italy after World War II. My father came over immediately after the war in '46, and my mother came 7 years later in 1953. And she came at 19 because my father they grew up in the same village called Sant'Elpidio, which is in the province of Rieti. Rieti is the closest big town near Sant'Elpidio, which, like your town, Marianne, is at the top of a mountain in the Valle del Salto. I think the closest bigger town to Rieti is Terni. So we're in kind of the same area, because Frosinone is not far from there either. So my parents grew up in that same village in Sant'Elpidio, and my father's family were farmers, and my mother's family owned the store that was the main grocery store of Sant'Elpidio. So they were essentially the aristocracy. Yeah, they were the aristocracy. Yeah. And my father's family was not so much the aristocracy. Right. And so one by one, my father's family moved, or emigrated to the United States over many years. And so one by one, they would leave and, send money back to bring more people back, over to the United States. And my father, as I said, came over in '46, and then he and his brother went back to Sant'Elpidio to find wives, and like you did. And suddenly the poor farmer was no longer seen as the poor farmer. He was seen as the rich American who could the lucky girl who got to marry him, got to go to the United States and,
Right.
you know, spend all day lounging around eating bonbons or whatever. And my mother didn't fall for it for a second. She did not want to go, but her mother essentially said, you know, you must go. This is your opportunity. You have to do this. And you know, to my mother, my father was an old man. He was 7 years older than she was, and why?
My father was 7 years older too.
Well, yeah, it's a thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, but so pretty much against her will, or something somewhat against her will, they married, and he brought her over. And the last thing I'll say is that, you know, she used to say to me, you know, I didn't even know your father. You know, for 10 years he was more like, you know, my uncle or my family friend, you know, but they were married. They ultimately were married for 65 years and had a very, very happy marriage overall. And then she says that she doesn't regret it. With all the fighting that she did with her mother, she doesn't regret it.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
So Chris, you were going to read something about,
right.
about your mom.
Yes, so I'm very happy that I have, you know, these two fabulous authors, and they will read each of them one piece of their writing. So I want to warn, Chris's is very moving, and I think Marianne is a little more, you know, upbeat. So Chris, please go ahead. Please tell us what it is. I'm going to also put a link in the chat if people want to maybe read it or reread it at one point.
Sure. Yes, it's a short, very short essay, about 4 to 5 minutes. So in case anyone out there is worried, they're going to have to listen to us go on forever. Very short essay that I wrote for Oprah magazine about, well, you'll see what it's about. It's a very short essay, but it's a good, what I said about my parents is a good segue, I think, to the essay.
Yeah, I agree.
So the title that Oprah magazine gave it was Love and Lost Italian Style, which I don't really love, but that was the title that they gave it. Reading, my mother said, was what American women did instead of cleaning their houses. She was standing on a chair, reaching into a cabinet above the fridge, the one with appliance manuals and expired Pepto-Bismol. She'd climbed up after I've made the last-ditch suggestion that reading a book might settle her mind. From the next room, my father called her. He had soiled himself again, or he wanted more juice, or to visit his brother who had died 10 years ago, or to give her a kiss. She handed a shoebox down to me and went to find out what it was this time. Inside were 3 paperbacks with disintegrated spines, romances she'd received as wedding gifts 62 years ago and brought from Italy for the boat trip across the Atlantic. I imagined the teenage girl who'd packed them only to stow them away, touching but never reading them. There was no time. On that boat, she had a husband for touching, and later, all those rooms to keep up, in-laws to please, children, a job sewing drapes in the back room of a shop. Now at 81, she spent her days shuffling, zombie-like, carrying dustpans and pillboxes from room to room. For 3 years, my father's dementia had been getting worse, and with it, the panic attacks that she'd suffered intermittently since childhood. They seemed to strike from the moment she woke until she crashed into an exhausted sleep. Our multiple daily phone calls, once filled with family gossip and plans for my next visit, were no longer conversations at all. I'd just sit feebly listening to her sob from nearly 400 miles away. Her doctors had prescribed a carousel of antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety medications that made her wobbly and slurred her speech. Months of cognitive behavioral therapy, including a week-long hospital stay, hadn't helped. Neither had everyone's bright ideas. Yoga, aerobics, finger painting, apple martinis, weekday mass. Out of pride, she refused respite care, a visiting nurse, and the company of friends. My mother had a second-grade education and couldn't read English at all. As a boy, I tried to teach her vocabulary from my school worksheets, but she'd struggled to retain the words. These shoeboxed romances, though, were in her native language, decorated with drawings, and the plot seemed simple. a prince, a farm girl, a curse, happily ever after. She read slowly, a few minutes a day at first, while my father slept in his chair. It was hard to focus, she said, her brain fuzzy from benzos, her ears cocked for his call. She often felt guilty and lazy, self-indulgent, American. But sooner than I'd anticipated, she finished all three and was hungry for more. To the internet I went, ordering sappy romances, Google translating plot descriptions to make sure they weren't too sad, too sexually explicit, or challenging. Each time a new book arrived on her doorstep, she'd call to say, with the first notes of joy I'd heard in a very long time, "This looks like a good one." After a few months immersed in these fairy tales, she developed her own taste. "They're all the same," she complained. "You see right away they end up together." By then, she'd grown less anxious and stopped the antipsychotics. With conspiratorial pleasure, she confessed that she'd been finding an hour, then two, a day to read. I sent a Sardinian mystery, The Lights of My Eyes, and a humor book, An Italian in America. She liked those okay and the romantic comedies that came after, but she criticized they talked too much, about nonsense. Couldn't I do better? I'd created a snob, and I couldn't have been happier. Still, it was with trepidation that I ordered My Brilliant Friend, the first of Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels. It was denser and deeper than the 20 books she'd read thus far. I worried it was too challenging, that its intensity, its messiness would upset her, especially as, one by one, she went off all but the last of the meds. I feared she'd feel something, this woman already drowning in sadness. I was right. "This is the best one so far," she marveled over the phone, exhilarated by the novel's power, her ability to grasp its difficulty, and the familiar voices of those Italian girls, their complicated friendship, the rage at the heart of it. As the months went on and my father began to spend more hours asleep than awake, she devoured the 1,600-page tetralogy, those lyrical, violent, brutally honest passages that confront life and womanhood head on. My father is gone now. On the phone, we rarely mention him, because if we spoke of our longing for him, the feelings would overcome us. In our Italian way, we are trying to protect each other. So we talk books. What makes a good story? "This house is a mess," she tells me. "I didn't accomplish anything. I just stayed in bed all day reading." So I'll stop there.
Bravissimo.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And we have a bunch of, a lot of people that are saying where they're from, where their family's from, and also so incredible. I have chills. Beautiful, wonderful, beautiful story. Brava, bravo. This was wonderful. So, thank you all. Yes, I agree. Very moving. It's interesting because, of course, she had good tastes, right?
I didn't know at first. I wanted to give her just silly. I thought, oh, we'll give her funny things, but what I found is that this is true for most things, like that kind of stuff. It distracts you for a little bit, but it's like candy. You go through it and then it doesn't nourish you. But good art, good literature. It gives you something that actually it makes you want to live. It makes you want to, because it brings you deeper into life, where those other things take you away temporarily in a false way, and your body knows. Your body knows not to trust it. So I was very happy that thing for her. And she's still I am Books. I donated, I think it was 60 to 80 books of hers in Italian that she read, that I donated back to I Am Books, and she's hungry for them. I can't get them to her fast.
Oh my gosh, that's fabulous!
Yeah. And her house is still somehow clean.
To introduce her to Maurizio Di Giovanni.
Yeah.
He does these detective stories set in Naples.
Oh.
Yes.
He sees dead people. They're awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take recommendations in the chat as well.
Yes.
Now, Marianne, I would love to hear your work. Yes,
Okay.
I love Marianne's writing. So I was just talking to our mutual friend Heidi Pittler today, Marianne, about how much we love your writing, how much more we want to see of it in the world. So,
thank you. Well, we're going from the good son to the disgraziata because I was there's another version of this in the book called Serpent's Tooth. How sharper than a serpent's tooth is, yeah. So I was the serpent's tooth coming up. This is girls and their mothers, but what can I tell you? So this
Go ahead, Marianne.
a version of this was in Corriere della Sera in 2017 when I did a book tour with my first book, which was published in Italian by Nutrimenti. So this is called Dreaming in Italian. I was waiting for my fanfare, which happened as a reward at the end of every Italian lesson I completed on the app I downloaded from Duolingo. I marveled at how psychologically astute the creators of this program were to laud me with trumpets for my fumbling attempts to be literate in a language I've demeaned all my life. The musical flourish can't quite hide the snorts of derision coming from my Italian mother's ghost. Ma's ghost sat across from me at my scarred oak table and whispered swear words in dialect in a mischievous attempt to drown out the high-toned Italian trilled by the language app lady, the one I've named Livia, after the domineering mother of Roman Emperor Tiberius. There are two speeds for listening to Livia deliver a sentence she wants me to translate: normal, which is really gibberish speed, and turtle for slow. Whenever my brain froze during a lesson and Livia sounded like she was making words up just to mess with me, I conceded defeat and clicked on turtle. And then Livia would repeat the sentence with enough disdain to corrode the microphone on my computer. I was learning Italian in haste because my first book, Jessie, had been published in Italy, and I was invited to present at a prestigious international book festival in Mantova, followed by a tour that would include my mother's hometown in Sulmona, the birthplace of the poet Ovid and famous for confetti, the sugared almonds given as favors at weddings. I wanted to read from the chapter where I described the famous Sulmona procession called La Madonna che scappa, the running Madonna, an Easter resurrection pageant that is really about the reunion of a grieving mother with the son she thought she'd lost forever. Every year during the Easter season, the Madonna Addolorata, draped in black, is carried on a bier by 6 men who employ a swaying dirge-like walk. Suddenly, the mother sees the risen Christ across the Piazza Garibaldi, and the men run with her to meet her son. Her black robes fly away and white doves are released. Under the mourning clothes, the Madonna wears green to signify hope. My mother spoke of this procession with the wonder of a child. When I saw it a year after my own son had died, I was too stunned by grief to feel wonder. In my book, I describe the power of its iconography, but I wrote from the point of view of an outsider into this culture that could so accurately personify grief. For the Festa della Letteratura, I wanted to read my book in Italian and answer literate questions in my mother's language. It was the reason that I was haunted by my mother's ghostly snickering every day as I puzzled over the daunting passato remoto, the remote past tense for things that happened long ago. This was payback for things that happened long ago. During my stormy adolescence, I honed my tongue on my mother's fumbling with the English language until it became sharper than a serpent's tooth. I was humiliated by her accent, ashamed of how tongue-tied and cringing she became with my teachers, salespeople, anyone official. I was ashamed of the fact that she wasn't American. Ma's Italian sounded low and guttural, and her dialect clipped off words, clacking over them like a knife chopping garlic. Her speech was an assault, harsh and ugly, as we battled hopelessly, roles reversed, my mother muttering unintelligible remarks under her breath like a sullen teenager, I speaking trisyllabic words I knew she couldn't understand in fake upper-class fluty tones the way I thought real Americans spoke. All the television sitcom moms I dreamed were mine warbled sweetly in a register an octave higher than my mother's throaty voice. When my mother spoke my name, she turned Marianne into Marianne. tainting it with her foreign pronunciation, stealing my wobbly, uncertain place in my own culture. I practiced sounding like the chirpy daughters of the sitcom moms, always aware of the role I was playing and of how much I was falling short of convincing anyone that I really belonged. I called my mother Mom instead of Mama, in my desperation to sound like the sunny children of what I thought of as the real America. I begged my mother for lunch money so I could buy the plate of fried bologna and rock-hard mashed potatoes offered at lunch rather than carry a greasy peppers and eggs sandwich to school and look like a foreigner. I hid my mother from my teachers as if she were Mrs. Rochester locked in the attic. And now I was attempting to read my first book aloud in the language that was the source of such shame to my younger self. My mother's tongue sounded so much truer in the reading voice inside my head, the words so much more dense and layered and palpable than the language in which I wrote the book, that I could not say them aloud without weeping. Some wellspring had been triggered. In English, I could read from my book about my son's death. In Italian, I could not. My mother was no stranger to grief. Widowed at the age of 43, she had 3 children, few marketable skills, and a tenuous grasp of the English language. My mother put on black clothes and prepared to immure herself in them for the rest of her life until her American friends intervened. But unlike me, she understood the necessity of taking time, singing songs of lamentation, even cursing the gods. A song of mourning from her region, Scura Mai, translates roughly to, "You have left me dark." When my father died, I was 15 and humiliated by what I thought of as my mother's excess of grief. I was American, I told myself. I wouldn't wail like some Mediterranean cliche. But my mother howled, bereft, and then went on, raising us, making a living, eventually even finding joy, while I developed asthma, my father's death sitting on my chest like a stone, stealing my breath. As she aged, my mother goaded death, calling it to her to show she wasn't afraid. On one New Year's Day near the end of her life, I asked her resolution for the coming year, what it would be, and she answered, to be dead this year, then laughed, a dare for death to come for her. And one of my final daily lessons with Livia before my trip to Mantova, the app wanted me to translate, "Oggi sono pronto a morire." I could hear my mother's signature bark of mocking laughter. "Today I am ready to die." Could have been the epitaph of the woman who pointed at hearses and said, "Look, there's my new car." My mother once told me she dreamed in Italian. Maybe that's why she's never spoken to me in my dreams, preferring the stillness of eternity to a revival of our one-sided linguistic bouts here on Earth. I had withstood Livia's scorn for over 100 days just before my presentation and Italian book tour. According to Duolingo, I was halfway fluent in the language of my mother's dreams. In Mantova, before an audience of 300 people, I was able at last to give my mother back her voice. From the distance of half a century, and with the shame I felt as a child dissipated and replaced by a love birthed in the empathy of my own loss, I was able to read aloud in Italian from the chapter describing the difficulties of mourning my son in an American culture that doesn't recognize the existence of age or death. Though choked with tears, I was able to read before the crowd. The last line of the paragraph said, "Torno di continuo in Italia perché è lì che l'ho trovato." I continue to return to Italy because it is there that I find him. But it wasn't only my son I was able to find this time in Italy. It was my mother, Mama, not Mom, that I invoked in my own voice, that is as low as my mother's once was. Thank you.
Okay, I see a common trait here. Mothers, le mamme, le mamme.
Yeah.
We are also in March, Women's History Month. You know, let's add that to this moving atmosphere of our moms.
I'm very grateful. I am very grateful now. Believe me, when I was coming up, I just wanted to be American, like I said. When I became an actor and I needed to pull emotion from me, you don't know how happy I was from coming up in a house where a normal dinner was people like, it was like an opera. It was opera. And I was very happy to be able to draw on that stuff. Believe me, I was very grateful for all of that. Do you feel that way, Chris, that you have?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, and of course for, as writers in the same way, there's so much emotion, so much, so much drama, so much melodrama that I sometimes, at first, when I first started writing, and I would show my workshop stories to people in my class, I would have people interacting like my family interacted. And they would say, this is not believable. I mean, this is too much. Like, this is like a soap opera.
Oh, no.
And I would say, no, this is a Tuesday, in the home of the Castellanis, So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, a regular dinner was like,
right, exactly. And so,
and I was watching the third season of My Brilliant Friend, and the mother in that, Anna Rita Vitolo, the one who plays Lenu's mother. Oh my God, she reminds me so. I mean, she pulled a knife on her kid, and I thought, yeah, okay, that happened during dinner a lot.
Right.
because I was a bad eater, and my mother would be slicing the loaf of bread like a suicidal violinist, like this, and she would say, "I got a knife in my hand."
I so wish. I love reading about your mother so much. Every story in Ma Speaks Up just made me so long to have known her, and
oh no, you would have loved you.
We had such different mothers in a way, but so much of there's a core kind of similarity in both of them. That kind of a fierceness, a different kind of fierceness. I mean, your mother ran numbers. I mean, my mother
was a bookie.
Yeah, your mother was a bookie. My mother was as far away from that as you could possibly be. But she had a different kind of like power and a different kind of strategy, about how to get what she needed out of the people around her, and and a different as as Chiara was indicating, a different kind of power over the family, right? She played a different role. Like, my mother was not the one that you were afraid of necessarily, but she was the one, actually, of course, who had the kind of emotional power that could make you cry way faster than my father could, So she knew exactly what to say in order to get right at the heart of you, and of course, you knew that of her too. So,
but did you have the thing too that you were almost you were the person that they called if someone official, if they needed, my mother would hand me the phone if someone official called, because her English would fail her, then.
Oh yeah,
right?
We both played that kind of. I mean, I was doing my parents' taxes in the 6th grade. I mean, and I handled all of that because neither my parents, my father could grasp the gist of the newspaper. Like, he would read in English, and he would read the Wilmington News Journal every day, and I could see his lips moving, like trying to read, and he got the general idea, but that was the extent of his abilities. And
my dad had no accent. He came here at 10, so he lost his accent. He was like, it was as if he were me. It was as if he were first generation. It was my mother who came later and who never lost her accent, and who, she was the one I battled with the most too, because I wanted, I wanted Donna Reed, not Anna Magnani,
It sounds like you were more like your father, sort of naturally, quote unquote, right? Like, you kind of
he was a reader. The house was filled with books, and my mother did not like that I read all the time. You're gonna go blind, or she would say to me, "You're so smart, you're stupid," and she was right. I mean, she was really right in many ways. I mean, it's true. There I was using trisyllabic words that I couldn't pronounce right. And and I didn't know how to do basic things. Like, when I moved out at 18, I didn't know how to pay rent. I didn't know how to cook. I knew nothing. So I mean,
Exactly. But I would feel very, I knew, I'm sorry, Chiara, were you going to say something?
No. Go ahead, Chris. Go.
No, I was just saying that I felt like I had a lot of guilt about my ability, like all the pride that my parents would always say and how educated I was and all of that, like I accepted and was happy for that pride, but I also felt a kind of guilt that I had a kind of power over them, that I could speak in three syllables and they wouldn't know. And that, and I really struggled with that. Like I both was happy to have that power, but also I kind of wished that, that I didn't, because it put a kind of pressure on me, or a kind of just, it separated me from them. And I just wanted to have a coherent relationship with them, you know?
But all the pride you felt, you were the boy, you know? I mean, I had to fight to go to school. They did not want me to go to college. They would say, you know, you're just going to get married. I'd be like, I am not getting married. I'm never getting married. And do you people not get how smart I am? I mean, literally, I was saying things.
Right.
Yeah, you're so smart, you're stupid. But
yeah. And that was for your father as well? Your father didn't support?
No, he died before then. See, he died when I was 15.
That's right.
So my mother was widowed, 43. I mean, when I think of that, with 3 kids, English is the second language, no marketable skills but cooking, right? So, I mean, really difficult for her.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was wrapped in my own adolescent cocoon of self-regard that was going on at that time.
So, Marianne, how did she support herself and you guys? Well, did she work at one point?
First, she became a lunch lady, which completely freaked me out at Our Lady Help of Christians, where I went. That was like humiliating. Then she started working at like a restaurant that was run by wise guys, and they loved her. And then she started booking numbers. So she was, she definitely, you know, completely got along, you know, and did her, you know, was able to. I recently was in the Lake, where I'm from, which is Nonantum, which is this part of Newton that everybody is from the same village in Italy. They're all from San Donato Valdocomino, and they paint the Italian flag down the main drag, and that's where my father's bar was. And I was recently in I walked into a sub shop, and there was a picture of all the wise guys, and then one lady with a bubble haircut. That was my mother. It was so great. I asked my sister recently, I was like, get me that picture. Go take a picture of it. I really want that, because she was amazing. The other thing that freaked me out about her was that they sent me to Catholic school, because now, Chiara, maybe you can tell me what they figured. How good is public school? It's free. In Italy, you pay for everything but the air you breathe, right? You want the priest to...
Well, it's also the Catholicism being very strong. I don't know, and I know from your book, your mom was not religious at all.
And that freaked me out, because I identified with the nuns, and my mother never went to mass. Every Sunday, she'd be there rolling out the hand-cut, beautiful, credit card thin spaghetti, which I would kill.
Did you at least take Latin? Because that might be...
take Latin. But
you see, that's a good...
You never go to church. I was afraid she was going to go to hell, and then I planned on going to heaven, of course. And I was afraid I'd be alone without her. And she'd be like, no, mothers don't have to go to church. Mother's got to make the macaroni. I'd be like, but you don't even go to confession. And she'd be like, hey, I got to tell my sins to some guy. And I'd be like, it's a priest. And she'd be like, yeah, let me tell you about the priest, Maria.
Exactly.
7-year-old. And so she was hilarious. Now, when I think of it, at the time, I was like horrified, because I thought, she's going to burn in hell and I won't be with her, you know?
Wow. I mean, my parents had not much cynicism about the Catholic Church. I was definitely brought up to believe in all of that and to not question it. And I mean, and because to them, the priest in their village, he was the educated one, and that's what they wanted for me. I mean, they didn't thankfully try to get me to be a priest, but they when I sort of started showing, you know, signs that I was, you know, maybe going to do okay in school. They immediately knew that they were going to send me to Catholic school, whereas my brother and sister, who were 14 and 16 years older than me, they sent them to public school. And so they kind of invested in me, thinking that I was going to, to do something a little bit better,
I think my mother recognized that the priest was a stepping stone as far as, because I think she did talk about my brother becoming, but I told her I wanted to be a nun because I wanted the outfit. And my father's response.
You wanted to play the nun.
I have played many nuns. That's what's really cool. I don't understand why this is happening, but anyway.
The inevitable nun, right? You have that essay.
Inevitable nun. Right? It's one of my short stories. But my father was like, over my dead body, I want to walk you down the aisle. And my mother's first reaction was, you going to keep your mouth shut? And then she says to my father, she wants to watch the priest Mudandis for free for the rest of her life. So she got it. I mean, basically she got it, she got what it was like. She had no fear of the nuns at all.
Now, my friends, we've talked a lot about mothers. Let's talk about children. And feel free, Marianne and Chris, to look at the chat because we have so many comments, and and then I'll read the questions to you guys. But first, let's talk a little bit about the children. Now, especially boys are particularly attached to their mothers, right?
Absolutely.
That's what we call mammone, mommy's boy. And I know that you, Chris, are working on something about mammoni, the plural.
I mean, in a way, this is, there's a cliche about writing that you just tell the same story over and over again, whether, you realize it or not, and it's absolutely true. In my first 3 novels, which were based on stories that I would hear from from both of my parents and from my other relatives, starting in the village in the 40s, and then the Italian American village in Wilmington, Delaware in the 50s, and then skipping ahead to the next generation of 40 years later. In each of those 3 novels, there's a mother-son relationship that is essentially at the core of the stories, and I didn't plan to do that. I'd never made a conscious choice to say I want to write about Italian mothers and their sons. When I went to write, the instinct kicked in that that's what I wanted to write about. And then when I was writing my most recent novel, Leading Men, which is about something could not be further from a mother-son story, a relationship between Tennessee Williams and his partner, Italian-American man named Frank Merlo. I actually do remember thinking, okay, like in this book, at least, I'm not going to write about a mother and son. And then this is so embarrassing to tell you that it was over a year after the book came out that I realized that there's a whole other section of the book between an older Swedish woman, a famous actress, and a young gay Italian man. And they have what is essentially a mother-son relationship. Yes. And I had no idea that I was writing that. No idea. But now with this book, with a new novel that I'm working on, I'm very deliberate. I'm just going to embrace it head on. And its working title is Mamismo. And it's a kind of like a retelling of Portnoy's Complaint, believe it or not, but from an Italian-American queer, gay, Italian-American perspective.
I can only imagine.
So, and I hope it's funny, but we'll see. But it may not. I'm only 100 pages in, so I don't know if it's going to see the light of day, but I figured it was time to actually confront the issue head on and see what I could come up with. So.
Wow. I'm so curious about this. Very, very curious. Let me, at this point, pass you a couple of questions that you can also see in the Q&A section. Hi, Chris. John is asking, hi, Chris, is there any part of Italia that reminds you of Provincetown, and why, if so? Now, can I say something here? How about the Tower of Siena? La Torre del Mangia.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
my thing. But you, Chris, what do you think?
Right. I mean, it is amazing that the Provincetown monument is the same monument that's in that it's Siena, right? It's modeled after that, and so it feels like I think that's maybe one of the many reasons why I love Provincetown. But it's such an interesting question. Nothing comes to mind in terms of a place that has the same kind of free spiritedness and the same kind of artistic misfitness that Provincetown does. I'm not as familiar with the more like if there are like really kind of gay areas of Italy. I mean, being gay in Italy is not an easy thing to this day.
Well, I studied in Bologna at
Right.
dance, discipline arte della musica e spettacolo, and my
Yeah.
house was called the second gay because we had a lot of gay friends in the arts.
Right.
Bologna was very lively and still is,
Yes.
And that's a
Um,
university town,
Right.
right?
exactly,
That makes sense.
exactly,
I have
exactly.
heard that, yeah, Bologna is the place to go in terms
Right.
I
of,
think it's the
Right.
place to go.
Yeah.
And perhaps there might be some resemblance with Provincetown. The liveliness, shows
Progressive,
everywhere.
liberal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to
Exactly.
spend a year there and
It
try to
doesn't
figure
look
that out.
like it aesthetically,
Right.
but
Right.
the feeling might be pretty similar. Somebody suggested Procida,
Oh,
that is the beautiful island.
Dying to go there. My Italian publishers have a bookstore there, based there.
So
Nutramente.
go.
Yeah.
Very pretty, very pretty.
Yeah.
Another question for the both of you. Do you both, Marianne and Chris, think that perhaps your deep immersion in Italian culture as first-generation Americans have helped you better navigate loss and grief and beauty?
Very much. I very much talk about that in my book, about how in Italy, even doing my book tour there, it was amazing how people understood and got it right away. I mean, they just were there for it, whereas in this country, I've written about how in this country, it's like, take a pill, get over it and move on. And you never stop grieving the loss of a child ever. And it's like, scuda mai, you have left me dark. And that's absolutely true. And it's more, here it's about taking pills. There it's about experiencing the loss in the company of others who understand that you have experienced the loss and need to still have joy in your life, which is a healthy way to experience it. America hasn't come to that place yet. And that's why there are so many people taking antidepressants, do you feel that way?
I absolutely. I mean, in a way, of course, we can't be any other way, right? I mean, I can't imagine like growing up in the kind of family that I did because you get those cues and those signals all the time about what it means to grieve, to lose, and other people, they look at it and to them it can seem performative. I mean, I remember when my mother, when people would die, my mother barely knew. She would put on black and she would do the whole thing. And I would say, Mom, you barely knew this woman. And I don't even think you liked her, but she would feel, it wasn't performative. She really did feel it. So
however, I will say when my dad died and I was 15, that's your most self-conscious age. It's the most when the American culture banged up against the Italian culture, and I just wanted to be closed off and left alone. And people were, my dad was only 50. I mean, my Uncle Joe pulled him out of the coffin. It was, I'll never see you again. Screaming people.
Talk about melodrama. I mean, in a way, like the Italian wake experience.
People were fainting.
As a child.
But that's where I think I told you in the book. That's where my mother told the nuns, "Fuck."
Oh, right. That's right.
I mean, because the nun made the mistake of taking her hand, the Irish nun, and saying,
"No swearing, Marianne."
No.
Parolacce.
And Ma kind of set her straight, and I thought, just kill me now. This is my teacher. But Yeah.
But I think,
But
you know, part
yeah.
of what that does, I mean, seeing those scenes growing up, and it does it, they were, again, they were sincere, but they were also scenes. I mean, going to all these, as I said, all these wakes and weddings and all of it, like with the, you know, Andre asked about the beauty of it as well. Like it kind of makes life kind of hyper real, you know,
Right.
and it teaches you to experience everything that way, right? So
Right.
so when I tell my, my Metagon friends, something that happened, like I'll describe it, and someone else who was there will say, "What are you talking about? It wasn't remotely that dramatic, you know? Like people were barely paying attention." I was like, "Are you kidding?" Like it was like people were crying, and like, no, you just experienced it that way, like you.
Yeah.
So it kind of that in that way, I definitely feel like growing up Italian it put everything in hyper real technicolor, even just walking to the grocery store, like everything feels like melodrama to me.
Well, that's why it was like, one of the chapters I read often from the book is when my husband's family met my family. I mean, they were like hyper, they're like waspy Texans, American people who came here and covered wagons. And we basically eloped because we lied to both sides of the family and said, "Oh, we have summer stock. We have to get married like really quickly." So because we just couldn't handle it. And then it came to the place where I was home on a weekend visit out of nowhere, and I get a call from Chris's mother, "Marianne, Dad and I are here." And I had to invite them to dinner and warn my mother not to use the F word and to just, calm down for the whole thing. And it all went really well. At first, she was like really obsequious to his mother and like, "Oh, you're so beautiful." She was like, and then afterwards she was like, "Yeah, the mother looked like nice, but don't cross her," right? I was like, "Yeah, you got it." And, and everything was cool until I left the room to make coffee and I could hear my mother's voice suddenly get really strong. And she was like, "No, no." And I could hear Chris's dad saying like, "Now, Linda, you can't." His dad was a doctor. I mean, these were professionals. Right. My mother was intimidated, but not. She was talking about, "When I want to die, I die." She was talking about euthanasia to Chris's father.
Why not?
And afterwards, his mother said, "She's a spitfire." Yeah.
I'm sure you and I'm sure other people in the audience have had, like, I so remember that anxiety of, like, I had to be in the room with my parents at all times. If we were around Metagons, other people, like I had to be there to like police them or to, and then leaving the room, God forbid I had to go to the bathroom. And then, like God only knows what they would say.
Well, that's when the euthanasia thing happened.
Right.
The minute I left to make coffee.
Yeah.
My God, this is so funny, guys. But yeah, I mean, two cultures clashing, right?
Exactly.
Next question, Marisa is asking, how have your siblings embraced the family heritage differently than you have?
I can say that one real quick. So my brother and sister are, as I mentioned, 14 and 16 years older than I am, and which is essentially a different, it is a different generation, and they have very Italian names. My brother is Emidio Antonio, and my sister's Lorena Maria. And when they were in school, they were relentlessly teased, and they were like you were describing, Marianne. They wanted no part of. Right. They wanted to be seen as American. And so when my mother got pregnant with me at 40, and they learned they were going to have a younger sibling, they insisted to my parents that they name me something American, and that they didn't speak Italian to me, and that they make me American. And they even gave, and the way they got my name is, there was a TV commercial, which I wish I could find. I looked on YouTube, but there was a TV commercial where a very like Gerber baby, all American looking baby was sitting in a high chair, and this very like Donna Reed type mother was feeding the baby and said, "Okay, Christopher David, here's your." And so my brother and sister said, "That's the name that you have to give him, so he will turn out like him." And then now, of course, I'm the most Italian of the
Right.
I'm the one most connected to our culture, I think.
Right.
And so anyway, that was how that went.
My brother and sister, I think my brother is only 3 years younger than me, and also he was the principe. So I mean, he has fond memories of coming up. My sister is 7 years younger than me, and she is in the family home that we grew up in, and she has embraced the culture of growing up in that area where everybody is from the same, and she enjoys it very much. You know, she enjoys the family gatherings that, and all of the culture that is, and I understand that. I totally get it. You know, even though I moved away, I get how that is so lovely to her, you know, to be around people who all know each other and understand that. And, you know, she embraces all of that stuff with gusto, which is great, you know.
Yeah.
Luisa is asking, Chris, do you think some of your mother's struggle with mental health was being estranged from her Italian culture?
I think actually so much of it was or is hereditary, in the sense that she tells me stories about her own mother having, she calls them attacks, right? They were panic attacks, but at the time they didn't know what they were. But every night at the same time, my grandmother would just collapse. Like after dinner, she would kind of spin around and sort of collapse, and then all the kids would gather around her and sing to her and feed her. And also she essentially had this daily panic attack. And a lot of many of my parents, my mom's siblings struggle with similar, and I also struggle, and my brother also struggles with panic attacks. And so a lot of it was that, I think, but certainly the dislocation from her family. She was the only one who left Italy. All of her siblings stayed there, and that dislocation, that inability to have people around you who were having similar anxieties and all of that, I think definitely made those worse for her, for sure.
Even because my friends, I have to, testify that having to always speak another language, sometimes it's hard, because, and I'm completely different from your parents. I learned English in school, so I kind of managed better. But sometimes you feel that you're not understood. And at the beginning, when I was here in the States, I was going to a grocery store and people didn't understand me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes I still remember I wanted to buy, I don't know, a pound of cheese. And I didn't remember whether it was a pound or an ounce, because, in Italy we have you have the metric system. So I was,
everybody else.
What am I gonna say? I was panicking in front of this, deli counter, and at the end I blurted out an ounce of cheese, and I come home with one slice. So, I must admit, that in spite of the fact that I had traveled as a kid, as a young woman, I have traveled a lot. I did have opportunity to speak English, but when you move and you have to speak English, and for us Italian English is hard.
Yeah.
Because
you don't have subtitles like the Germans, right? You have a lot of dubbing, and that
exactly. I mean, we can't nowadays. It's better with all this social media, YouTube. I can see that nowadays Italian teenagers speak English and understand English much better.
Yeah,
much better. But for me, I didn't understand anything. It was and I had studied it in school, which was very scholastic. I knew the grammar perfectly, but I couldn't understand one word. So I think that can easily bring a person to depression, or at least to not, So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that many people, and at this point, I'm not even talking only about Italians, but in general, immigrants. If you change the language and if it's a hard language, it's gonna be hard.
My mother was lucky because my father spoke, of course, Italian, and she became very close to my aunt Elena, who spoke Italian, but she was born here. So the Italian she spoke was dialetto, and she also didn't understand classic Italian. So hilarious things would happen to them. Like they both went to Italy in the 70s, and she would like be in a classy restaurant saying, "Ando sta luces," which is basically "Where's the shit house?"
Yeah, in a very Napolitan or Southern Italian accent, which is
that's what she knew from,
And this I see a lot.
She'd look at you like,
this I see a lot in Italian students here in the States, where maybe they are first or second generation and they know something. The fabulous thing is that something really was passed down, but they know some words, they know dialects, and so they come sometimes to me and they say, "Help me, because I go to Italy and nobody understands me," or they tease me. Yeah.
Well, for me, I didn't, when I started studying Italian, I finally understood the stuff my mother had been saying to me in dialect, like, "Che ti possono uccidere." I hope they kill you, basically. Not me, others will kill you.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Okay, let me read another question and then we'll have to close in about 5 minutes. Anna is asking, growing up Italian in American is different than growing up Italian in Italy. Do those differences figure into your writing, you guys?
Big time.
Marianne?
Yes, I mean, both, even the book I wrote in memory of my son was highly infused because of the grieving that we spoke before about. And then I wrote this thing about my mother. And I've also written a novel, a coming of age novel that is very heavily based on my own, upbringing. So yeah, it's totally colored my writing. You, Christopher?
Absolutely. And even when I set I set my first novel in Italy, so I had to write about the characters, fictional characters, who were growing up in Italy. I, of course, drew so much from my own experience in an Italian family and also from my parents talking about what it was like for them to grow up. So it's always, I don't know what it would have been like. I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about, like what our childhoods would have been like, Marianne, if we weren't children of immigrants, but what would our parents have been like? Well, if they had stayed in Italy and we were their children over there. I mean,
you know what? I had a weird glimpse of that because my aunt Elena was first generation herself, and so she would have been the mother. You know what I mean? That I would who spoke English, who So I often pretended she was my mother.
Last question. Just a second. Have you both ever felt like an oddball? Too Italian among Americans and too American among Italians? Thanks and congrats for your amazing work.
Definitely. When I go to Italy, I have a friend, Davide Ferrario, who says to me, "You think you're Italian, but you're American." And then I get insulted, but he's right. What about you, Chris?
Absolutely, yeah. And whenever, especially when you enter the space, the literary space with Italians who are, very demanding of, you have to have read all of Italian literature, for them, they expect that you've read all of these things. And I just am not Italian enough in that way to be as familiar with Italian literature. I was a student, I was a literature student, in graduate school and college, but of course I read almost nothing of Italian literature. I read only British literature and American literature.
True.
And so I feel, and then of course in the Ivory Tower, I always felt like I wasn't treated as seriously because I was Italian and because I came from a very working class background where So
I mean, all I ever heard when I went to the Midwest was about how we're all genetically criminals, basically.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of course, I mean, I'm sure people have many people out there know way more about this than I do, but there's so much snobbery from the Italian North to the Italian, and from the Southern Italians, and of course the Southern Italians who came here were the worst of the worst. And so what could we possibly contribute to literature?
Right. Tutti caffoni. Right.
Right, exactly. I heard the word caffone.
O terroni, o terroni.
Terroni, I don't know that one.
Terrone is a dispregiative word towards the Southern Italians, by Italians.
Oh, I didn't know.
By Italians, yeah. Well, yeah. Okay, my friends, please know, Chris and Marianne, that tomorrow I will send you an email with attached all this amazing chat, because we had so many comments, so many questions, so many people really, really, really involved and active, that I want for you to read them all, because I didn't have time to read them all, right? So we will take our time, relax on a sofa, and read these beautiful comments.
Well, thank you to everybody who came tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, let me say that our next event of our series, it's gonna be pretty soon, in less than 2 weeks, Tuesday, March the 15th at 7 online, celebrating the feast of Saint Joseph. C'è San Giuseppe, okay? So featuring author Sandra Scalise Junot and filmmaker Kirsten Keppel. So we will also show Kirsten's short documentary, it's 18 minutes, titled Ringraziamenti, the St. Joseph's Day Table Traditions. So we are gonna talk about all the delicious food for San Giuseppe. And even there, as Marianne Esposito was saying in our last meeting, it's very different region by region. So it's gonna be an interesting discussion about how we celebrate San Giuseppe in the States, in Italy, and so on. So, yeah, you see, wonderful. I will make an anchovy and pasta, San Giuseppe pasta. Brava, Antonia. Very good. Sounds good. Okay, my friends.
Thank you,
Marianne. Thank you, Chris. You've been amazing. I really hope that we can organize perhaps an in-person event with the two of you at the bookstore.
That would be great. I'd love to read.
It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be so much fun. So please keep in touch. And thank you again. Grazie mille e grazie a tutto il meraviglioso pubblico.
Thank you.
Alla prossima.
Grazie.
Alla prossima. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.